If there's one thing we're well versed in here at Team TripleJump, it's bad games. Well, not necessarily bad, but at the very least worse than most. You'd be forgiven for thinking that if a game isn't very good, it would follow that it didn't sell particularly well, especially these days where publications will often be sent advanced copies of games to review prior to release and can dish out a plethora of scathing reviews before a title even hits the shelves. Oddly, it doesn't always follow that a poor title will be a financial flop, however, and sometimes a game that's utter ploppers will still have some people running out to the shops to buy it. We understand that critics don't always get it spot on, and just occasionally a game that's bamboozled the reviewers will turn out to be a massive hit with fans. I think you'll all agree when you see the entries on this list, however, that this wasn't the case for any of these titles. I'm the reasonably commercially successful Ben from TripleJump, and here are 10 bad games that sold well. Number 10. Hey You, Pikachu! Whilst a game where you can talk to Pokemon may sound like a lot of fun, it's important to remember that most of them can literally only say their own names. Admittedly, Hey You Pikachu is marketed at kids, however, just because something is intended for children doesn't mean we give it a pass when it comes to being a bad game. The premise is fairly simple. The player character is a child that's been recruited by Professor Oak to test out the Poke Helper, a device that allows people to speak to Pokemon. The game utilised voice recognition, which in our writer's opinion comes only second to motion controls in terms of being a massive gimmick, and players would need to say words to Pikachu in order to make friends with it and complete various tasks. Sadly, the range of tasks was limited and the technology was hit and miss. Not only this, but spoilers, after 365 in-game days, Professor Oak rocks up and tells you that you have to release Pikachu back into the wild despite having spent hours trying to make friends with it. Regardless of its traumatic twist and technological limitations, however, the game still shifted almost 2 million copies, meaning that it sold better than the 3DS re-release of Pokemon Red and Blue. Outrageous. Number 9. HOMEFRONT: The Revolution. When the first HOMEFRONT game was released in 2011, it was met with mixed reviews, and though some critics panned the short length of the single-player campaign, others praised it for its multiplayer story and overall atmosphere. It sold fairly well, however, and that could only mean one thing: a sequel, of course. HOMEFRONT: The Revolution wasn't exactly a sequel, however, and was touted as more of a reimagining of the first game. It takes place on an alternate version of Earth in the year of 2029 and follows protagonist Ethan Brady as he joins a resistance movement fighting to free the city of Philadelphia from the grips of the North Korean army. Though its premise was reasonable, HOMEFRONT: The Revolution was hindered by numerous technical failings. Generally, the criticism was levelled at the poor frame rate, wonky voice acting, awkward combat, and the many bugs that have been peppered in for good measure. Though it didn't sell as well as its predecessor, in spite of all of its pitfalls, HOMEFRONT: The Revolution still managed to sell over 1 million copies. We can only assume that the players were more forgiving than the critics were prepared to be. Number 8. 50 Cent Bulletproof. Despite the official UK PlayStation 2 magazine giving it a frankly ridiculous score of 8 out of 10, 50 Cent Bulletproof is not a good game. You may remember it fondly, but critically it's not a good game, and that's why it's on this list. Don't type too much hate in the just don't put any hate in the comments. What's wrong with you? We can only assume that whoever reviewed it at the PS2 mag gave the score as some sort of out-of-season April Fool's joke. Pretty much everyone else panned the game, which follows the titular Fiddy on his quest to seek vengeance against the hitmen who attempted to murder him. Those who played the game found the controls to be incredibly sloppy, making killing enemies, the whole point of the thing, damn near impossible. On the plus side, the story isn't awful, and the game naturally features a soundtrack by 50 Cent himself, but neither of those things are enough to save it. It seems, however, that the rapper's draw, along with the likes of Dr. Dre and Eminem, who also make appearances in the game, was enough to ensure that Bulletproof sold over 1.5 million copies. This meant, naturally, that it got a sequel, and whilst 50 Cent Blood on the Sand was a market improvement for the franchise, it sold quite poorly, thanks, we should imagine, to its predecessor, and no further titles have been developed since. Number 7. KINECT Adventures. Although KINECT Adventures did sell incredibly well and was a pretty terrible game, it might be argued by some that it only sold well because it came packaged with the KINECT, and therefore people were effectively forced into buying it. Our argument, however, is that the KINECT on the whole was a bit crap and didn't have all that many decent titles. You might even go so far as to say that the hardware bred mediocrity, and therefore we're awarding it a spot on this list. Please don't argue with my logic. Anyone unfortunate enough to be one of the 24 million people that got their hands on KINECT Adventures will have gotten to experience delights such as 20,000 Leaks, a game which captures all of the fun of fixing a hosepipe with duct tape, and Space Pop, wherein players burst soap bubbles in space. Staggeringly, its inclusion with the KINECT meant that KINECT Adventures was the biggest selling game on the Xbox 360, meaning that it outsold the likes of Grand Theft Auto 4 and 5, Minecraft, and Skyrim. Just allow that to sink in for a moment. Number 6. Sonic the Hedgehog 2006. After years of subpar titles, the gaming community had hoped prior to the release of Sonic 06 that the game would mark a return to form for the franchise. All of the pre-release showings and demos had looked so promising, and everyone had their fingers crossed that the little blue hedgehog was going back to his roots. Oh, how disappointed we all were. Whilst Sonic 06 was praised for its graphics and audio by some critics, others were far quicker to point out its shortcomings, which were presumably caused by the developers' rush to get the game out in time for the holiday season. The camera system was difficult to navigate, and its shoddy implementation made the game far more difficult than it needed to be. It also suffered from rubbish controls, long loading times, and various glitches, so despite looking and sounding nice, it just wasn't worth playing. Regardless of its failings, however, nearly 1 million people went out and bought copies of Sonic the Hedgehog following its release in 2006. We can only assume that these sales were purely based on the pre-release hype, because we can't imagine anyone would be sane enough to buy it after the critical lambasting it received. Oh well, at least we've still got Shadow. Number 5. The Walking Dead Survival Instinct. The Walking Dead always feels like one of those properties that's just crying out for a really good video game adaptation. Admittedly, Telltale's take on the franchise was very nicely done, but the highly story-focused gameplay isn't necessarily interesting for those who prefer a bit more action. Unfortunately, 2013's The Walking Dead Survival Instinct was not the solution to that problem, and whilst, yes, it is a first-person shooter that brings a lot more action than its predecessor, it just isn't a good game. Releasing less than a year after Telltale's The Walking Dead, Survival Instinct follows fan favourite Daryl Dixon as he traverses the undead hellscape during the early days of the apocalypse. The game drew the ire of critics who claimed that its quality was in complete contrast to Telltale's efforts, accusing it of being nothing more than a lazy cash grab. Poor graphics, a lackluster plot, and broken, slow-paced gameplay all contributed to the game's overall critical failure. Whilst official sales figures are harder to come by than a Twinkie in a zombie apocalypse, the game charted highly in the UK and the US, which is frankly baffling for a game that's less fun than an afternoon with Negan and Lucille. Number 4. Enter the Matrix. For many of us, our first memory of The Matrix would have been seeing it on VHS in the early noughties and wishing that we could dodge bullets and bend spoons with our minds. It seems that the good people at Atari, Shiny Entertainment, and Infogrames heard our demands, but like some malevolent genie that grants wishes, just not in the way that you really wanted, we got stuck with Enter the Matrix. Although it sold 5 million copies worldwide, presumably riding on the coattails of its far superior movie cousin, the game received fairly negative reviews. One of the biggest complaints was that the game didn't allow fans to play as Neo, instead opting to make the Matrix Reloaded's secondary characters, Ghost and Niobe, the protagonists instead. It was also argued that the very existence of Enter the Matrix contributed to the Matrix Reloaded's failings, as a portion of the film's plot was set aside to be used in the game. Add to the mix obtuse camera and fighting controls, poor level design, and a plethora of bugs and glitches, and it really is a wonder that the game sold as well as it did. Oh, and for anyone wondering, Path of Neo, the game that does let you play as the One, isn't much better either. Number 3. Aliens Colonial Marines. For all the hate we give to Aliens Colonial Marines, it's easy to forget that it actually sold pretty darned well after its release in 2013, managing to shift well over 1 million copies to unsuspecting sci-fi fans. I just hope they kept their receipts. Set in the Alien universe and taking place not long after James Cameron's spectacular space action romp Aliens, Colonial Marines sees a military unit attempting to rescue any survivors of the Sulaco spaceship. Sadly, as interesting as the premise sounds, nothing about the game was executed successfully. Graphically, Aliens Colonial Marines was bad, with low-resolution textures, poor quality lighting, and frequent screen tearing being the order of the day. It also suffered from buggy AI and enemies that just failed to bring any scares, which for a franchise noted for inducing fear in even the bravest audience members was a massive faux pas. Despite all of its flaws, many of which ended up being modded out of the game, Aliens Colonial Marines somehow managed to top the UK sales charts, and at release was the biggest launch of 2013. Admittedly, it was only mid-February, but still, it had managed to outsell Call of Duty Black Ops 2, Far Cry 3, and FIFA 13. Number 2. Superman 64. The weird thing about Superman 64 is that many of us who played it as kids didn't think it was that bad at the time. It's only now that we look back without the rose-tinted glasses of youth that we realise what a stinker it actually was. Based on the eponymous DC Comics superhero, Superman 64 sees the Kryptonian beefcake attempting to save the likes of Lois Lane and Jimmy Olsen from the clutches of the evil Lex Luthor. Although the plot is the exact kind of thing Superman fans might be looking for, the actual execution of the game was awful. It not only suffers from the same problems as your average bad game, i.e. unresponsive controls, low frame rate and a ridiculous number of bugs and glitches, but it's also infamous for that flying through rings level. Even though it's now considered to be the worst game released for the Nintendo 64 and one of the worst games of all time across all platforms, Superman 64 managed to shift a respectable 500,000 copies. This is probably owing to the fact that its target audience, children between the ages of 6 and 11, loved the game, even with all of its flaws. Number 1. Wii Music. You're all familiar with Wii Music. It's the example we wheel out every time we're looking to demonstrate what prime cringe looks like on account of its dreadful E3 demonstration in 2008. Oh god, just look at them all. The gameplay is not dissimilar to other titles in the Wii series in that the idea is to simulate an activity using the Wiimote, nunchuck, and balance board. In Wii Music's case, you're attempting to recreate the experience of playing musical instruments, and credit where credit's due, the game does offer a veritable smorgasbord of instruments to choose from. Sadly, that's where the praise ends really, because even though there is a bit of fun to be had having a go at each of the instruments, you're really just waving your arms about to music. It lacks the sort of skill requirement of the likes of Guitar Hero and Rock Band, and most of the songs are either public domain tunes or Nintendo soundtracks, so unless you're mad for the Mario theme or La Cucaracha, there's really not much appeal here. Still, even with all these limitations, Wii Music sold a whopping 2.65 million copies, and whilst it's the worst selling of the Wii series, it still outsold the Wii versions of Resident Evil 4, Call of Duty World at War, and even Guitar Hero 3. Good stuff.